When the 3rd Marine Division landed on Iwo Jima in February 1945, the men of the 21st Marines knew they were entering hell. The island was a barren volcano, black sand, jagged rock, sulfur vents steaming from the ground. They had trained for a fight, but nothing prepared them for what they saw on D-Day. Japanese defences were unlike anything they had ever faced. Machine gun nests were carved deep into the volcanic stone. Concrete pillboxes overlooked every inch of beach. Mortars, anti-tank guns, and artillery were hidden behind steel shutters. Every cave, ridge, and crater was part of a massive, interconnected maze designed by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi to kill as many Americans as possible before the island fell. And among this nightmare of fortifications, one weapon seemed almost useless: the M2 Flamethrower. Heavy, bulky, slow, a glowing target on the battlefield. Most Marines avoided carrying it if they could. Flamethrower men had one of the deadliest jobs in the Pacific. They had to walk up to a bunker, often under direct fire, get within 20 to 30 yards, and ignite it. Flame operators were prime targets for snipers. Many never survived long enough to fire their first burst. But on February 23, 1945, one Marine was about to change that. His name was Corporal Hershel Woody Williams. A lean, soft-spoken farm kid from West Virginia, Williams didn't look like someone destined to join Marine legend. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't brag. He barely stood 5 feet 6 inches. Before the war, he'd worked as a truck driver and a farmhand. But what he did have was determination. When the Marines pushed inland from the landing beaches toward Airfield No. 1, Williams was assigned to the demolition section. His job was to eliminate enemy positions using explosives or flame. For 2 days, his unit had advanced inch by inch under brutal fire. And then they stalled. A network of reinforced concrete pillboxes, supported by trenches, overlapping fields of fire, and interlocked machine guns, stopped the entire battalion cold. Every approach route was covered. Marines advancing even a few yards were mowed down. The sand offered no cover. Attempts to flank the position failed. Tanks trying to assist were targeted by hidden anti-tank guns and mines. The bodies of wounded Marines lay scattered in the open because no one could reach them. Williams watched as stretcher-bearers tried to crawl forward and were shot immediately. Finally, an officer shouted above the chaos, "We need a flamethrower! Somebody get up there and burn them out!" No one moved, not because they were cowards, but because the job was suicide. The Japanese inside the pillboxes waited for flamethrower operators specifically. They tracked the tanks of fuel on their backs. They aimed for the igniter hose. They knew flame was the only way to reach them. Williams didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, calm and steady. "I'll do it," he said. A sergeant stared at him. "You sure, Woody? That's a death run." Williams shrugged. "Someone's got to go." He strapped on the flamethrower, 70 pounds of fuel, hoses, pressure cylinders, and igniter assembly. The weight bowed him slightly forward. He checked the valve, tested the pilot light, pulled his gloves tight. Behind him, Marines watched with a mixture of dread and awe. The men of his company knew they had no chance of breaking through without someone taking out the pillboxes. And every man knew that if Woody failed, the Japanese would keep their stranglehold on the battlefield, and hundreds more Marines would die. A captain walked up to him. "Williams, we'll give you covering fire, but once you make your move, you're on your own." Woody nodded again. He stepped out of the foxhole into the open volcanic sand, directly into the sights of a dozen Japanese machine gunners. Carrying a weapon most Marines prayed they would never touch. And he began walking toward the first bunker. The afternoon that followed would become one of the most legendary acts of individual heroism in the entire Pacific War. The moment Woody Williams stepped into the open, the Japanese gunners inside the pillboxes saw him. To them, a flamethrower operator was the highest value target on the battlefield. Machine guns instantly shifted toward his silhouette. Bullets snapped through the air around him, kicking up black sand at his feet and slicing through the straps of his pack. Marines in nearby foxholes rose up to cover him, firing blindly at the firing slits in the bunkers. Bar gunners emptied magazines until their barrels glowed. Riflemen sent round after round, cracking into the embrasures. But the pillboxes didn't slow. Their firing ports were deep, reinforced by steel and concrete. The Japanese gunners had perfect overlapping fields of fire, and they weren't wasting a single shot. Williams ran low, the heavy tank on his back clattering with each step. He had to close the distance. At 30 yards, the flamethrower could scorch a bunker. At 20 yards, it could clear it. Any farther, and the flame would disperse harmlessly. He reached a shallow depression in the sand and dove in, panting, listening to bullets hiss overhead. He reached back, flipped the flow valve, and thumbed the igniter. The flamethrower hummed. The nozzle vibrated. The pilot light flicked alive with a sharp snap. Then he stood. An explosive roar blasted from his weapon, sending a stream of burning fuel arcing into the first pillbox. The flame hit the firing slit, curling inward. Inside, trapped Japanese defenders screamed as the fire consumed air, fuel, and men in seconds. The pillbox erupted with smoke, one bunker down. Williams sprinted sideways, zigzagging as bullets chased him. He reached a second crater. The flamethrower's tank was heavy and already losing pressure. He had to return to the rear for more fuel. Twice he ran back across open ground. Twice he returned with a full tank on his back. Twice Marines risked their lives covering him. Each time he re-emerged onto the killing field, Japanese snipers and machine gunners focused entirely on him. He became the center of the battlefield, the one man the Japanese desperately needed to stop. At the second bunker, he approached from behind, leaping onto the roof and spraying the ignition ports. Flames shot downward into the ventilation shafts. Smoke poured from the seams. The pillbox burned from the inside out, 2 bunkers down. On his third run, he crawled through a shell crater that led dangerously close to an enemy trench. He didn't know it, but inside that trench were 2 Japanese soldiers preparing to ambush him. One lunged with a bayonet. Williams reacted with pure instinct. He shot a burst of flame directly into the trench. The 2 men disappeared in a wave of fire. 3 bunkers down, 4 bodies in the trench. The 4th bunker was the most dangerous. Its position dominated the entire Marine front, and its gunners had pinned down an entire platoon for nearly a day. Williams crouched low, waited for the machine gun bursts to pause, and sprinted up the slope. He reached the concrete bunker, but the flame wouldn't push deep enough from the front. So he did the unthinkable. He crawled around the back of the bunker, into the Japanese blind spot, and found a tiny ventilation hatch. He jammed the nozzle inside and fired. Flames shot through the interior like a hurricane, tearing through ammunition, fuel, and men. The bunker detonated violently, sending debris pouring from the firing slit. 4 bunkers down. Marines along the line watched the explosions in disbelief. They had never seen anything like it. Each time Williams returned to them, smoke blackened and gasping, they refilled his tank, slapped his back, and sent him out again. And again, he went. By mid-afternoon, Woody Williams had burned out 6 pillboxes, destroyed multiple trench positions, and cleared the front enough for the 21st Marines to resume their advance. Every bunker he eliminated removed an entire knot in the Japanese defensive line. But there were more. The Japanese weren't finished, and neither was Woody. The most heavily fortified bunkers were still ahead, deeper into the volcanic rock. And the next one would be the worst of all. By late afternoon, Marine riflemen began advancing behind the ground Woody Williams had cleared. Smoke drifted across the black sand like fog over a battlefield made of ash. The shattered remains of Japanese pillboxes burned in dull orange glow, their concrete faces split open like cracked shells. But ahead of the Marines loomed the largest and deadliest of them all. It was a fortress, a massive interlocking bunker system built into the volcanic ridge, sporting multiple machine gun ports, a reinforced steel door, and trenches linking it to two smaller firing pits. This was the nerve centre of the Japanese defence, and if it didn't fall, the entire Marine line could not advance. Williams had already made 6 runs with the flamethrower. His arms shook from exhaustion, and the skin on his face was reddened from heat. The heavy tank on his back felt twice as heavy now. The straps dug into his shoulders like claws. A corpsman approached him. "Woody, you can't keep doing this. You're gonna get killed." Williams shook his head. "We need to get through that thing." The corpsman exhaled. "That bunker's impossible." Williams gave the small, tired smile he was known for. "Then I guess I'll have to make it possible." Marines around him prepared to lay down covering fire. Barmen positioned themselves behind sand mounds. Riflemen steadied garans against rocks. 2 Marines stepped up and volunteered to escort him, but Williams refused. "You cover me," he said, "but nobody runs with me." He knew why. Flamethrower men were magnets for fire. Anyone next to him would be shot instantly. Williams waited for the machine guns to pause, then sprinted across a stretch of sand that looked like the surface of the moon. Craters, smoke, shattered rocks. Bullets tore up the ground behind him. Snipers fired from hidden slits. A mortar exploded only 20 feet away, throwing him to the ground. He stumbled back up, ears ringing, the flamethrower tank clanking against his spine. He dove into a crater halfway to the bunker and lay still, catching his breath. In the seconds of silence that followed, he could hear the Japanese talking, reloading, preparing for him. They knew he was coming. They were waiting for him. Williams crawled out of the crater and hugged the volcanic rock, making his way toward the bunker's flank. A hidden machine gun port fired at him but swept too high, missing him by inches. He rolled into another depression, flipped the safety valve of the flamethrower and thumbed the igniter. The nozzle hissed. The pilot flames snapped alive. Williams rose into a crouch and fired a long burst into the nearest firing port. The flame hit the slit and curled inward, sucking oxygen with it. Screams echoed from within. A second port fired blindly into the sand, spraying rounds over his head. Williams ducked, crawled toward the bunker's rear, and found the steel ventilation pipe. He aimed, braced himself, and pulled the trigger. A jet of flame roared into the pipe, igniting everything inside. The bunker shook as ammunition detonated. Smoke belched from every opening. 7 bunkers down, but the killing machine wasn't finished. 2 smaller pits beside the main bunker began firing, laying down crossfire to prevent Marines from advancing. Woody moved toward the first pit, keeping low. He approached so close he could hear the Japanese shouting inside. He stood, fired at point-blank range, and the entire pit went silent. 8 bunkers down. The last bunker was buried deep in the rock, almost invisible except for its central firing slit. The Marines had tried grenades and small arms on it all morning. Nothing worked. Williams ran the final yards through a storm of fire. A sniper round struck his fuel tank, but failed to ignite it. Pure luck. He dropped to his knees, aimed the flamethrower, and unleashed the longest burst of the day. Flame poured inside the bunker like a tidal wave. The volcanic rock glowed red. Smoke billowed out in thick black sheets. The Japanese inside never stood a chance. 9 bunkers down, 1 Marine. One suicidal weapon. The battlefield had fallen silent except for distant gunfire. Marines who witnessed the final bunker collapse later said they could hardly believe what they were seeing. A single Marine had done what a company could not, but Woody Williams wasn't thinking about glory. He was trying to breathe, shaking from exhaustion, his face blackened with soot. And the Marines around him were preparing for the counterattack that always came after a breakthrough. But that counterattack would never arrive. The Japanese line had broken. Woody had shattered it alone. When the 9th bunker collapsed into flames, a long silence swept across the battlefield. Smoke drifted upward in thick columns, twisting into the sky like black tornadoes against the harsh volcanic sun. Marines who had been pinned down for hours slowly rose from their shell craters, staring at the smouldering line of fortifications that had tormented them all morning. For the first time since dawn, the Japanese guns around Airfield No. 1 went quiet. It wasn't luck, it wasn't artillery, it wasn't tanks. It was one Marine with a flamethrower, a weapon everyone else had avoided, a weapon many officers insisted was suicide to carry. Corporal Hershel Woody Williams dropped to one knee, the heavy tank hissing softly as the last of the pressure drained out. His arms trembled violently from fatigue. His coveralls were scorched, his gloves melted in places, and his face was streaked with soot. The rubberized straps had left deep red marks across his shoulders. A sergeant ran to him. "Woody! Jesus, Woody, you're alive!" Williams tried to answer, but he was too exhausted to form words. He simply nodded once. Behind them, Marines began moving forward through the wreckage, clearing what remained of the defensive line. They found bunkers split open, trenches charred, weapons and ammunition melted together. Several Japanese defenders were still alive but dazed, crawling out of smoking entrances and surrendering without a fight. The flamethrower had broken not only the fortifications, but also the will of the men inside. With the line shattered, the 21st Marines surged ahead, taking ground they had fought for all day. Tanks rolled through the sand, bulldozers cleared debris, and stretcher teams finally recovered the wounded. One corporal put it simply: "If Woody hadn't burned those bunkers, we'd still be lying in the sand." But the cost of clearing those bunkers was enormous. 2 Marines who had volunteered to lay covering fire for Williams had been killed. Others suffered burns or shrapnel wounds. The battalion's nerves were shredded. Yet for the first time in 48 hours, the Marines had hope. Williams sat in a shallow crater while a corpsman poured canteen water over his face and hands. The black soot ran in rivers down his chest. His eyebrows were singed off. His gloves had fused slightly to the flamethrower grip. The corpsman inspected the tank and shook his head. "You shouldn't be alive," he whispered. Williams managed a faint smile. "I kept low." When commanders learned what had happened, they couldn't believe it. Reports said Williams had single-handedly taken out 7 to 9 pillboxes, depending on which officer counted the destroyed positions. Some bunkers had been connected by trenches, meaning one burst of flame had wiped out multiple fighting pits. Others had been considered invulnerable before Williams burned them out. Major General Graves Erskine summoned Williams after the battle, asking him to describe how he did it. Williams shrugged, too humble to dramatize anything. "I just did what needed doing, sir." But the officers weren't done talking about him. Word travelled fast, first through the regiment, then through the division, then through the entire island. Marines whispered about the flamethrower Marine who had walked straight into enemy fire and lived. His fellow soldiers, hardened by weeks of brutal combat, were stunned by the scale of what he'd accomplished. When the battle for Iwo Jima finally ended, Williams was recommended for the Medal of Honor, the highest award for valor in American military service. Few men in the Pacific Campaign had performed such a concentrated act of bravery over such a short period of time. Months later, in a ceremony at the White House, Hershel "Woody" Williams stood before President Harry Truman. The president pinned the sky-blue ribbon around his neck. Truman shook his hand and said, "I'd rather have this medal than be president." Williams, uncomfortable with praise, simply bowed his head. He lived a long life after the war, working with veterans, helping families, speaking rarely about what he'd done. He never bragged, he never claimed to be a hero. He always insisted the 2 Marines who died covering him deserved the credit. On the day he passed away at age 98, Woody Williams was the last living Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. But on Iwo Jima, on that black volcanic sand under fire from a dozen machine guns, he was just a Marine with an outdated, suicidal weapon who cleared 9 bunkers in one afternoon and changed the course of a battle.